Hello and welcome back to another episode of Warhammer 40K Model Evolution. This week it's a bit of a weird one. We're looking at Leagues of Votann, otherwise known as squats. This is going to be a different video compared to my other model evolution videos, and the reason for that is because I can usually look at the exact same army line and compare the same units to previous units of different eras and editions. However, Leagues of Votann is technically the newest army in Warhammer 40k, and there are no repeat units yet. So instead, I'll be comparing the new models to similar looking old models from Rogue Trader. I think it'll make for a pretty interesting video to compare where some of the ideas for these new models came from, considering the squats from Rogue Trader started all the way back in 1987. Let's start with the Hearthkyn. These are our basic infantry for the Leagues of Votann. I was a huge fan of these models when they first got announced. I especially like their very rounded helmets. I think all the designs for the different weapons look super interesting. What I really like about the Leagues of Votann is they were able to give them a very unique sense of style. They do look quite similar to Space Marine armor, and you can tell there's a lot of influences from that, but it's still its own type of design. The comparison I'm making with the Hearthkyn are the Squat Squad from Rogue Trader. While they don't have any armor and their weapons are surely different, the mass of infantry gun line is the same kind of idea that Hearthkyn are getting across. These models are pretty funny looking. I can see about 7 different copies of the bald guy in sunglasses there. I think that's pretty hilarious. And the clothes these guys are wearing are much more influenced by, looks like kind of guardsmen more than Space Marines, which I find interesting. Next, let's look at the Hearthguard. These are some of the coolest models in the line. I really like the exosuits these guys are wearing. Once you get anything giant shoulder pads like that, it automatically looks pretty badass in my opinion. I especially like all the rune designs that these have in the chest piece there, and the sunken in kind of head that they have in the suit I think looks really cool. The easiest comparison is obviously the squat in the exosuit from Rogue Trader. He has a gun and a sword just like the Hearthguard have, and he has some giant shoulder pads as well. I think this is a pretty clear inspiration for what the modern Hearthguard models look like. However, this is called the Hearthguard Warrior from Rogue Trader. And that is simply because of the squat lore. The Hearthguard name comes from the elite bodyguards that were under the command of the warlord. I think it looks really cool. It looks like it's inspired by the kind of Buckingham Palace King's Guard look with the really tall hat and the red uniform. Let's look at the Thunderkin. I really like these models. I'm a huge sucker for some big guns. I like the kind of stripped down exosuit look they have, and I think these are supposed to be sort of the engineer side of the Leagues of Votann. So I think it's really interesting that they aren't covered in armor. They're actually looking more kind of like engineers and scientists with their kind of goggle helmet situation they have going on. This one feels like a bit of a stretch, I'm not going to lie, but I want to compare these to the Space Dwarf Heavy Weapon crew. Specifically, the big shoulder guns that you see there remind me the most of the Thunderkin guns. I think this whole unit looks pretty cool. I really like their sergeant in the bottom right corner there with his hands on his hips. Alright, next let's look at the Grimnir. These guys are our psychers for the faction. Very fantasy influenced here, you can tell. This guy looks a lot like Gandalf. I really like the little flying support guys he has here. I think those are called corvs. And I especially like all the detail he has on his staff. I think that looks really nice. This is an easy comparison because the Grimnir is supposed to be considered a living ancestor. This is the psychic side of the squat army, and this is the only available living ancestor model. I think it's important that the Space Dwarves have their kind of bald, bearded wizard archetype. I think they needed that, and I think this old model looks pretty fun for the time. Next, I want to look at the Brokir Iron Master. Again, this is the engineering side of the faction. Again, I really love those servitors that he has. All these different designs look super interesting to me. I'm a really big fan of the Castellan robots from the Admech army, and these have a very similar but obviously smaller look to them. The Iron Master, I want to compare most closely with the Tech Squat. This obviously just looks like a Space Marine shrunken down, but this is a real Rogue Trader model. And I would also compare it to the Squat Servitor. This looks the most like the Iron Master to me with the goggles and the big bushy beard. The Pioneers were one of the first models that came out for Leagues of Votann. I think they're very cool. I think they're super unique. I really like the kind of trike design they chose to go with. And I think it's really cool they're supposed to be kind of the vanguard of the scouting unit, and that's why they all have the super thick wool coats on them. I would say the Pioneers remind me the most of the Squat Trike here. Obviously just because it is 3-wheeled, but also because it has a driver and a gunner, similar to the Pioneers. Obviously this one isn't hovering, but let's just say they developed that later down the line. It also reminds me slightly of these Squat Bikes here. Not nearly as much since they don't have a gunner on the back, but similar kind of idea. I think these Berserks are very cool. Big fan of this unit. These remind me the most of the Fire Slayers from Age of Sigmar. I think it's very important for your dwarf army to have some kind of berserker axe-wielding unit, but those power fists are what I'm focusing on in my comparison, because I want to compare the berserks to the Space Dwarf command group here. These appear to be a little more heavily armored, a little more strong, a little more melee focused than our previous squat infantry unit, and because they have that power glove there, that is really the main connection I'm making here. The Khal is the current highest ranking HQ for the Leagues of Votann. I think this one looks pretty great. I really like his specialized armor with all the different gold elements. I think his axe looks really nice. And I think I did a good job of putting him on the stones there, so he'll obviously stand out a little more compared to the basic infantry units. This is the Squat Warlord, and this is the Rogue Trader leader unit. Seems like a lot of things kind of revolved around the Warlord. The Hearthkyn were his elite fighting force. And I can see why when you have a helmet like that. Pretty impressive. Honorable mention here to the Chaos Squats from Rogue Trader. Gotta have a crab claw in there once you become infected by Chaos. Pretty classic. I think these all look pretty great. I think I see a little bit more Nurgle influence, especially with that one in the middle holding up his sword. Here's a Chaos Squat in the Exo armor. I think this is pretty awesome. Give it some horns and some tusks and boom, Chaos. This is another Chaos Squat in the Exo armor. This one is great. Look at that pot of greed type of smile he has there. Some more Chaos Squats in Exo armor. Pretty good looking models. I wanted to look at some of the older models here that haven't been refreshed and do some quick predictions on whether or not they could come back in the future for Leagues of Votann. First of all, this Thud gun is pretty cool. Leagues of Votann have a few really useful vehicle options, but they don't have any stationary guns yet. I think that could be something really cool that they decided to make for the Leagues of Votann. Considering that the Imperial Guard have lots of stationary typed guns, I think it'd be pretty interesting for Leagues of Votann to have one for themselves. Here's another option here with the mini mortar from the old Rogue Trader squats. I also think they could make an even bigger exosuit type of unit, something like a dreadnought for the Leagues of Votann. It'd be really cool if they used this influence and they made it a lot more round, but it'll be really interesting to see what League of Votann get coming up in the next edition. Thanks a lot for watching and hanging out with me. Let me know what you think of my comparisons, or let me know if I missed anything down in the comments below. Consider subscribing for more content like this. And thanks a lot for watching. Take care.